Yeah.
So we are going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live.
Thank you. A very good evening to all of you. On behalf of ISCRS, the Indian Society of Cornea and Keratorefractive Surgeons, I welcome you in this webinar wherein we will be learning from our expert who is hugely experienced, vastly experienced in the field, in the topic that he will be discussing today, and that is getting the best out of your toric implants. He has loads of experience in this field, and we have with us the president of ISCRS, Professor J.S. Titiyar, who is the Chief and Professor of Ophthalmology, RP Center, AIIMS. He has numerous publications, and he is again a person who has loads of experience in this particular field, and he has received various awards, including the American Academy, numerous celebrations all over the country, and he was the first Indian to have performed live cataract surgery at ASCRS, and he has also received the most coveted Padma Shri from Government of India by the President of India. Rajiv? And Senior Consultant, Mukherjee Eye Clinic, New Delhi. He is also a visiting professor at Feinberg School of Medicine, Chicago, USA. He is an established cornea and phaco surgeon and has presented various papers at various levels. And I would like to welcome him in this wonderful meeting. And I'll request him to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. D. Ramamurthy.
We welcome Dr. Ramamurthy, a very, very well-known and a senior eye surgeon, ex-president of AIOS. He's the chairman of the Eye Foundation Group of Hospitals. There is MBBS from JIPMER, Pondicherry, MD Ophthalmology from the RP Center, AIIMS, DNB in Ophthalmology, followed by a fellowship in vitreoretinal surgery. He's the chairman scientific committee of AIOS from 2008 to 2014. He's the president of Tamil Nadu Ophthalmologic Society in the year 2015, was the president AIOS in 2016, and edited 2 editions of the Ready Reckoner in Ophthalmology. And we are really proud and privileged to have Dr. Ramamurthy with us delivering this masterclass.
Indeed, we are really thankful, and these words are much less than what he is. He is a giant figure in the field of cataract and refractive surgery. We also have with us our 2 esteemed panelists. One is Dr. Himanshu Mehta, who is again a very experienced surgeon in this field. He has done his training from KEM Mumbai and then MS Ophthalmology from Mumbai University. And then he did his fellowship at Houston, Texas. He is the director of the Vision Eye Center, Mumbai, and he is known for operating so many VVIPs who come to Mumbai. So most of the VVIPs go to Dr. Himanshu Mehta in Mumbai. So we welcome him, and we also welcome our another panelist, Dr. Anurag Mishra.
Dr. Mishra did his MBBS in 1999, MS Ophthalmology in 2003, two long-term fellowships in IOL and anterior segment at the pediatric ophthalmology in Strabismus at Madurai. 13 years of experience on them. Faculty invitation in various society meetings, 30 live surgery done till date, publications in peer-reviewed journals. He's passionate about understanding and practicing technology. He has one of the best assembly of equipments one can actually eye for. He's the director, Radha Raman Hospital in Cuttack, and is a partner, Card Vision Eye Hospital, DBSR. Welcome, Dr. Mishra.
We also have who is the chairperson committee ISCRS and professor of ophthalmology in the Cornea, Cataract and Refractive Surgery Services at RP Center. She's also the secretary of AIOS, the regional secretary of APAO, secretary Eye Bank Association of India, and has numerous publications and a lot of awards to her credit. And myself, Dr. Rajesh Sinha, working as professor in the Cornea Lens and Refractive Surgery Services at RP Center. I'm the Honorary General Secretary of ISCRIS. So before we actually start the lecture,
expert talking on a subject which is so common for everybody to learn, to expertise the outcome of these procedure in a patient, to improve the outcomes. The panel, which has nicely been selected by Rajesh, who are also very, very experienced in this field. And definitely we would like to take questions and give them a definitive solutions for their queries. And I would really like to welcome all of you for this very important topic of the day. Yeah, Rajesh.
thank you, sir. I would like to.
It's my slide scene.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ISCRIS, Professor Tityal, Professor Rajesh, Dr. Rajiv, Professor Namrata, and all the executive members. I know that you have been doing a wonderful job conducting this Friday meeting, spreading the best of cataract surgery and refractive surgery across India. It's indeed an honor to be invited to deliver a lecture in this forum. All the panelists are well known to me, and I consider each of them an expert. I truly look forward to learning as much as delivering a lecture in today's evening session. I really hope that we turn out to be much richer after this experience. The topic given to me is getting the best out of your toric intraocular lenses. And what I'm going to take you through is my practical take on this, what exactly we practice, what exactly we teach our junior consultants and our fellows as far as handling this intraocular lens is concerned. And I hope there's a significant interaction both during the presentation as well as afterwards. One of the first things I want to say is that do with the refractive astigmatism that the patient has, because what matters is the curvature on the anterior cornea. Lenticular astigmatism can be quite significant. As we can see over here, you do not really need an eye test to go ahead and practice toric intraocular lenses. But just to drive home the point that I'm trying to make, this is the astigmatism which is internally present, which is there on the cornea. And this is the total astigmatism in the eye. As you can see in this particular eye, almost the entire astigmatism is from the internal optics or from the lens, which is almost to the extent of about minus 1.5 diopters. And obviously, this patient might have been wearing astigmatic correction in his or her glasses right through the life. But as you can see, the cornea is quite pristine. And once this lens is taken out, obviously, there is no need for a toric intraocular lens. So essentially, the astigmatism in the spectacles is not an indication. Looking at the other end of the spectrum, you can see over here, the astigmatism on the internal optics and in the cornea, which are literally counteracting each other so that the total is almost, and as you can see here, but in case the lens, then the corneal astigmatism manifest, which is to the 1.25 diopter, quite significant. So what you need to go by is the anterior corneal astigmatism rather than what the power astigmatism that says that he or she is willing for a cataract surgery. The first thing that we do before counseling the patient is to subject them to a IOL Master 700 Barrett toric calculator. As you can see over here, this is a patient who has a significant cataract and the best corrected visual acuity is just 6/36. So we have no idea about the astigmatism in this particular cornea. It's possible earlier what used to happen is that we used to go ahead and go ahead and accept a multifocal intraocular lens, maybe with a LRCS platform. All was fixed up, and then when the patient was brought on to the optical biometer or even the immersion age scan and the autokeratometer, then we used to find that there is a significant astigmatism. As you can see in this case, going to be talking about a toric multifocal intraocular lens, or in case the patient finds it too expensive, maybe go ahead and suggest a toric monofocal intraocular lens. Basically, in case you have had a significant conversation about the multifocal intraocular lens, subsequently you find that the patient has a significant cylinder on when you do the optical biometry, as in this case, obviously it's a little difficult to go back to the patient and make them accept that what you need is something different than what we are talking for altogether. That's likely to be a little more expensive, and maybe the patient has to reverse his decision to go ahead with a toric monofocal intraocular lens. So as I said, when the patient accepts to undergo the cataract surgery, the first thing that we do is either an immersion age scan with a keratometry or an optical biometry using the not just the universal Barrett 2 formula, but the Barrett toric calculator, so that what we get straight away an idea as to whether the patient requires a toric intraocular lens or a non-toric intraocular. Looking at another example, you can see over here, the patient essentially has this amount of myopia simply because of the lenticular sclerosis. You can see a significant astigmatism over here. But what you would find when you see or do a Barrett and no toric lens in the left eye. Obviously, this is a patient. I would not suggest a toric intraocular lens, in spite of the fact that the patient, these are actually actual screenshots of our own patients, our own cases I'm showing you. And this is how we deal with our patients today. So in this particular patient, the conversation about the toric intraocular lens would not come in at all. Straight away, we would talk about a monofocal or a multifocal intraocular lens. Now that we have made it a standard practice to do a toric calculation straight away and then subsequently go ahead and counsel the patients, we have found that the entire process has become so much more scientific, so much more easier, both for the counselor, the doctor, and as well as the patients. Today, I would say we are in the age of astigmatic enlightenment. Though I have been using toric intraocular lenses for more than a decade, I would say that my very own understanding of various concepts of storicity in the last 5 years or so has changed quite considerably. The most important factors being the posterior corneal astigmatism, the surgically induced astigmatism, and the toricity ratio. Douglas Koch and various others have done seminal work. In 2014 Binko's lecture, he brought out the concept of posterior corneal astigmatism. The posterior corneal astigmatism is something which our instruments we did not measure, we did not have much idea, and it was usually ignored. But today we realize that the posterior corneal astigmatism, in 85% of the cases, at least against the rule astigmatism, which increases the amount of against the rule astigmatism in the anterior cornea or compensates for the with the rule astigmatism in the anterior cornea. So especially when you are practicing toric intraocular lenses in great numbers, this is something that you need to keep in mind. The other important factor is that the toricity on the anterior cornea is not a constant. It is usually with the rule astigmatism in the teens, in the young age of 20s and the 30s. And that's the reason when we look at our refractive surgery patients, it's most often with the rule astigmatism. But slowly this tilts over the lifetime of the patient at the rate of about 3/8 of a diopter over a decade, so that when the patient present to us for their cataract surgery in their 60s and 70s, most often they have against the rule astigmatism. This is a change that occurs entirely in the anterior cornea. The posterior corneal astigmatism does not change over the period of time. So hence, the posterior corneal against the rule astigmatism and the change from with the rule to against the rule astigmatism over the lifetime of the patient makes us realize that when you have with the rule astigmatism on the cornea in a relatively young patient, you go easy on correcting it. But at the same time, even though you might be making a temporal clear corneal incision, if the patient has significant amount of temporal against the rule astigmatism, you would go ahead and you correct it, even if it's to a degree of about minus 0.75 diopters, 0.75 diopters, especially if you're implanting a multifocal intraocular lens. The other aspect that you need to understand is the concept of toricity ratio. What exactly does this mean? What we have been told is that if you have about 1.5 diopters of power at the plane of the intraocular lens, at the corneal plane, you would have a correction of about 1 diopter. But just like in spherical lenses, the effective lens position has an important role to play. Similarly, when it comes to toricity also, that is significantly altered depending upon the power of the basic power of the intraocular lens that you are implanting. When it's a highly hyperopic eye of about, say, you are implanting a plus 30 diopter lens, the ACD is likely to be low, the axial length is likely to be low, and here the ratio is just 1.2 diopters at the intraocular lens plane for correcting 1 diopter on the corneal surface. And if it's a highly myopic eye, if you're implanting, say, a plus 5 diopter lens or a minus 5 diopter lens, the amount of correction that you get on the cornea for this extremely long eye, where the nodal point is also quite posteriorly placed, is almost to the range of about 1.75 to 1. So basically, depending upon the basic spherical intraocular lens power and the axial length of the eye, the toricity impact on the corneal surface also varies. At just about 1 for a correction of about 1 diopter at the anterior corneal plane. But on the other hand, if you have an extremely long eye of about 30 millimeters axial length and a corneal power of about 48 diopters, you will require almost 1.86 diopters for a correction of about 1 diopter at the corneal plane. And the last factor that I want to develop on is the surgically induced astigmatism. For a long time, I believe my 2.2 millimeter incision, temporal clear corneal incision, topical anesthesia, which I have been doing for more than a decade and a half now, induces about 0.47 diopters of astigmatism, because that's what my Hill calculator told me. But today we understand that astigmatism is not just has a magnitude alone. It is a vector which has direction as well as a magnitude. There are surfaces like over here, which can counteract each other, so that the centroid value of the astigmatism that's created by a sub 2.4 millimeter temporal clear corneal incision is just about 0.1 diopters. You can calculate it for yourself for each of your incisions, but it does not really add much value. Either making just zeroing it out or just putting it as 0.1 is a good idea. I do see that quite a few senior surgeons even today in conference presentation talk about their corneal surgically induced astigmatism being 0.35 diopters, 0.4 diopters, etc. But we have to understand that concept is completely gone. If it is a 2.4 millimeter incision or less, it's 0.1 diopter. If you are making about 2.8 millimeters, temporal clear corneal is about 0.25 diopters. That's the reason that we have almost completely given up on axis. Usually earlier we used to identify the steep axis of the cornea, make our incision there. We do realize now that it doesn't add much value, and essentially you have to understand it's just about 0.1 diopter. And as far as the formula itself is concerned, as we have discussed earlier also, there are multiple different formulae that are available, but if you have multiple centers, multiple practitioners, and as we have in today's audience, people across the spectrum from the Apex institution, but small-time practitioners, we need the go-to formula. I do understand the LADA formula, the Kane formula, the Hill RBF, even the so many other formula, even the SRKT has its own value. But what we have done in the last 4 or 5 years is to zero in on one particular suite of formula, where the Barrett Universal 2 is the basic formula, which gives us the spherical power of the intraocular lens to be implanted. The Barrett toric calculator, which was alluding to earlier, is our go-to formula for the toric intraocular lenses. When it's post-refractive surgery, it's Barrett 2K formula. And in case the patient is left with a residual cylinder after the implantation of the toric intraocular lens, is a Barrett RX formula. And in case you are implanting a toric intraocular lens in a post-refractive surgery scenario, whether it's a radial keratotomy or a laser vision correction, then you go ahead and use the Barrett 2K toric calculator. That's great, but where do you access it? And why do I say that this is my go-to formula, especially for my toric intraocular lenses? There are various papers which have been published, and this is one of the papers which shows the comparison between the accuracy of the Barrett toric calculator, which is some of the more recently available formula. It shows that the incidence of residual, the spherical equivalent of the residual astigmatism that's left behind of being less than 0.5 diopters is highest when you use the Barrett toric calculator, which is in the range of about 75%. As you see, the other formula somewhat fall short of this expectation. And with some of the later iterations of the Barrett toric calculator, some of the further modifications like the TK being added on, this percentage has significantly improved. And today it's even possible to achieve a number like 90% accuracy. And why is it that the Barrett toric calculator is able to achieve this kind of accuracy? One of the primary reasons is because it takes into consideration the thickness profile of the intraocular lens that you're implanting. That is the basis of the Universal 2 formula. And as far as the toric calculator itself is concerned, it takes into consideration the posterior corneal astigmatism. It's a mathematically derived value which is incorporated in the formula. It also takes into consideration what I alluded to earlier, the effect of the against the rule drift that occurs with age. An algorithmic adjustment, it usually targets about 0.25 to 0.5 diopters of with the rule astigmatism as a residual. And it takes into consideration the basic intraocular lens spherical power that we are implanting, which is important, as we saw earlier, because of the asphericity ratio. Again, you are able to feed into this formula the centroid value of the induced astigmatism of incision, which I have mentioned is in the range of about 0.01 or 0.1. And as regards the K index itself, it essentially depends upon the keratometry from which you are taking your measurements. For most keratometers is 1.3375. For example, for the IOL Master 700, it's more in the range of about 1.332, and you can adjust these things. And where exactly these formulae are available? These are available in most of the optical biometers that are currently in use. And so whenever you are going ahead and purchasing an optical biometer, you make sure that this is a formula, apart from the other formula like the Haigis, the Hill RBF, etc. is incorporated. For me, it's most important that we have almost all these different optical biometers in different centers. We have ensured that the Barrett suite of formula is available with this. And most importantly, in a few of our centers where we do not have the optical biometers, still we use the Barrett formula only by accessing the website, the ASCRS and the APSRS websites. And if you go on to the homepage of these websites, even the APSCRS website, you do not even have to be a member here. You have right on the homepage, you have this IOL formula and you can access this. And even if you are making manual keratometry readings and immersion A-scan readings, you can go ahead and feed these into this formula and get the best of results. And suffice it to say that this website where you have the Barrett RX formula and the Barrett 2K toric formula, these are not even available in the optical biometers. So even though you may not have access to the any optical biometer, you can still enjoy the benefits of this excellent. And how exactly do I incorporate this? The Alcon toric calculator, I'm just using it as an example, itself is based upon the Barrett toric calculator. And what you see over here is you feed in the axial length, you feed in the anterior chamber depth, and you feed in the intraocular lens spherical equivalent power. The reasons you want this data is because based upon this, the intraocular length, the toricity ratio is also quite calculated. So depending upon whether it's a plus 20 diopter, whether it's a plus 10 diopter, or whether it's a plus 30 diopter, the toric power will also be changing. Again, you can have a space for surgically induced astigmatism. As I mentioned, what you feed in is about 0.1. The K index is again calculated depending upon the particular instrument that you use for measuring your keratometry readings. And then subsequently, you go ahead and calculate your exact toric power. Does it really make a difference? Basically, this was a small comparative study that we did ourselves. We used the earlier Alcon toric calculator, which is called the legacy toric calculator, which is not taking into consideration the posterior corneal astigmatism, does not have a place for a surgically induced astigmatism, and does not take into consideration the toricity ratio. For the same eyes of the same patient, as you can see over here, there is a significant difference between the earlier toric calculator and the current toric calculator of the same company, which was currently in use. So if I was earlier using the formula, I would implant a T6 lens instead of a T4 lens. I would implant it at 10 degrees instead of at 0 degrees. So this is the kind of difference that has landed in. And in my own practice, I have found that my results of toric intraocular lens implantation has significantly tightened up. And then just to briefly allude to the concept of total keratometry, basically what exactly you are able to, this is based upon the swept source concept. And as you can see over here, what we do in this particular case is to using the IOL Master 700, not only are able to measure the axial length, we are also able to accurately measure the thickness of the cornea. And because we get a reading of the anterior surface of the corneal curvature, what we get is an extrapolation of the posterior corneal curvature. So you get a readout of the anterior corneal curvature as well as the posterior corneal curvature, and the addition of the anterior corneal curvature and the posterior corneal curvature, which is usually negative, is what gives you the total keratometry. It was initially thought the TK values, incorporating the TK values rather than the assumed values, and the original Barrett toric calculator might land up in better values. And that's the reason today you have the Barrett TK Universal 2, Barrett TK toric, Barrett TK True K formula incorporated in the IOL Master 700. And definitely this has translated to somewhat better outcomes, as you can see in a paper published over here. As far as the results of the toric intraocular lens power calculation, the residual astigmatism is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, when you use the TK formula, whether it's in the Hygis or the Barrett cylinder, you find that compared to the original Barrett toric calculator to the Barrett TK toric calculator, then the results are somewhat better. But suffice it to say that Barrett himself admits that it's not much different, and it's not equipment just because it's giving you a TK values. And even the basic formula, which mathematically evaluates the posterior corneal astigmatism, is good enough. The other concept that I want to leave you behind, which might help you to in your day-to-day practice, is how do you exactly calculate what is going to be the correction of the toricity on the corneal plane, depending on the IOL power that you are implanting. You all have heard of these terms of T4, T6, T7, etc., especially in the Alcon platform. The simple calculation is you take T5, 5 minus 1 divided by 2. 5 minus 1 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. So 2, when you talk about T5, it gives you basically correction of 2 diopters on the corneal surface. And when you are having a T7, 7 minus 1 divided by 2, that is 6 divided by 2, that gives you 3 diopters. And when you talk about T9, 9 minus 1, 8 divided by 2, 4 diopters. So whenever I'm just cross-checking a patient with about to undergo a toricity, toric intraocular lens implantation, I'm told that's a T8 power that's going to be implanted. I just verify that what is the astigmatism in that particular patient that needs to be corrected, and ensure, just make a quick calculation to make sure that I'm implanting the right power. You also have to understand that there are multiple excellent toric intraocular lenses available, not just in the imported platform, but even from Indian companies, obviously making it affordable and accessible to most of our patients. And when you talk about a T3 from an Alcon platform, it might be very different from a T3 in an orotoric. So essentially, it's important that you go by the cylindrical power correction at the IOL plane, which is usually what's marked on the box. rather than just the concept of T3. So do not confuse with T3, T4, T5 is by and large applicable to the IQ platform, but obviously the other alternatives available. So it's important to go by the IOL plane correction and translate into what the transitions on the corneal plane. And when you're talking about the surgical aspect itself, there are various ways of marking, and I'm going to quickly run through this because you can see it's a freehand marking. There's the bubble marking. It's held parallel to the surface, and you can see the bubble, which is extremely centrally placed. That tells you it's parallel to the ground. You leave marks at the 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. This is done on the slit lamp before the patient's pupil is dilated, and you get a mark at the 3 o'clock and at the 9 o'clock meridian. And then, of course, the fact that so many multiple variations of that tells you none of them are absolutely accurate. Most often it's because of, but then in case you have an access to the digital marking system like the Varion or the Callisto, that might be a good way to go. Point of time, it was still we are in creating an incision, because depending upon what the company used to advise, and you can see that 2.2 millimeter incision that's being done, and subsequently intraocular lens that's been implanted. You can see the marking for the intraocular lens position, and usually you implant the lens in such a way that what you require for the final positioning of the lens is a little bit of rotation in the clockwise direction. The Varion is there, the incision at right at 0 degrees, and the side port incision 70 degrees apart. And usually I do a little bit of polishing of the rim of the anterior capsule also. And subsequently, the toric lens is implanted. It is because a laser platform has been used, and optimal rhexis, which is of about 5.2 millimeters, has been achieved. And the CD is quite low. And the toric orientation, and again, it's extremely important, especially if you're using a dispersive viscoelastic. The viscoelastic is completely evacuated, both in front of the lens as well as from behind. And just using a Sinskey hook and I would gently retract the lens and make sure that the intraocular lens, the toric intraocular lens, is exactly corresponding to the position where it's expected to be, so that we can get the optimal outcomes with these intraocular lenses. That's the end of the surgery. Obviously, there's much more to these lenses, just the surgical aspect. And this is a toric multifocal intraocular lens that's been implanted. And whenever you are implanting multifocal intraocular lens, any significant amount of toricity needs to be completely correct. Examples from my own case sheets. As you can see here, this was just when the PanOptix was coming into our sometime in the beginning of 2019. And this patient had a 0.87 diopters of against-the-rule astigmatism. I implanted a simple PanOptix lens, not a PanOptix toric. Patient had an excellent N6 visual acuity for near, but had only 618, 612 visual acuity uncorrected, was quite unhappy for the distance vision because he required a significant amount of mixed astigmatism. Of course, there are patients who would live with it, but was not quite accepting that. So essentially, I counsel that I will deal with it with the laser vision correction, but counseled him to undergo the second eye surgery. And what I did, as you can see here, this patient, this eye, second eye had almost exactly the same amount of against the rule astigmatism. What we implanted in that is a T3 Panoptix intraocular lens, which obviously translates into an excellent correction as far as distance, near and intermediate is concerned. So that's the importance of dealing with any amount of cylinder, especially when you dealing with multifocals, trifocals, or synergy lenses. And as you can see, subsequently, we did with the residual corneal astigmatism on the cornea with the laser vision correction. Let us look at a case 2. And as you can see over here, just to tell you that against the rule rays are completely two different animals. I am quite often asked, what is your limit as far as implanting toric intraocular lenses are concerned? Is completely different for against the rule astigmatism. As you can see here, for a 0.98 sub 1 diopter of astigmatism, what the formula shows is a requirement for a T4 toric intraocular lens. But on the other hand, when it is a with the rule astigmatism about 0.75 diopters, what you require is a non-toric intraocular lens. So don't go just by the number of the astigmatism, but also look at whether it's against the rule or with the rule astigmatism. It's not only enough if you get the toricity right. As you can see over here, significant amount of toricity. We went ahead and implanted a Symphony toric intraocular lens in this case, and it's an excellent lens which we widely used to use. Here we got the toricity absolutely right, but as you can see here, the patient required a +1 diopter in the spectacles for his near vision. Again, a somewhat unhappy patient. So what did we do? Went ahead and implanted a Panoptix T6 intraocular lens in the fellow eye. I think as far as mixing and matching these intraocular lenses is concerned, is entirely limited by the imagination of the surgeon and limiting the expectations of the patient. And this case, I wanted a better near vision. And what we ended up achieving that, as you still required a +1 diopter for reading. Distance vision is absolutely perfect for both distance and reading. But with the Panoptix toric in the second eye, the near vision is extremely good. Bilaterally implanted this patient, it was a happy patient. What in case you get a refractive surprise? There are various ways of dealing with this. And here is a situation where I did implanted a +24 T4 toric intraocular lens and ended up with a toricity of this ratio. And whenever the residual astigmatism after the toric intraocular lens is almost, the spherical equivalent is almost 0. As you can see here, +1 with a cylinder of 2.5 diopters. This is where rotation of the lens is going to work well. And the Barrett-RX formula essentially tells you that what is the amount of rotation that you have to do to essentially neutralize the residual astigmatism. In this case, it had to be rotated from 6 degrees to 176 degrees. It also tells you, in case you are going to exchange the lens, which will happen in case the spherical equivalent is not nearly 0. If you just have about 2.5 diopters or 2 diopters for astigmatism left behind, you might have to exchange the lens. This will tell you what exactly is the power of the intraocular lens that needs to be exchanged with. And in case it's a patient who has had an intraocular lens done years back, the capsule has completely fused down, you want to piggyback a lens. Again, this formula will tell you what exactly is the power of the piggyback lens that needs to be implanted. And essentially, I'll just skip this video. It's quite rotation and post rotation. Nowadays, I more often do it with the Varion display. It's important that you do not accept or you do not convince your patients to accept suboptimal outcome when you have gone under irrigation cannula alone. I go ahead and implant and rotate the intraocular lens at its right position, and it obviously translates to much better outcomes. And it's extremely important that you ensure that when you're making your measurements, that its ocular surface is optimal. As you can see over here, there's a significant difference in astigmatism in the two eyes of the patient that was not there in the spectacles. What we found here, can you believe it? This is see a significant change in intraocular lens power that occurs. So it's not just important to optimize the ocular surface for the surgery alone, but it's important to optimize it even for your biometry values. And in case you have a pterygium, it usually translates to with the rule astigmatism, and it can have as high as a 4.27 diopters. So if it is a significant with the rule astigmatism, is that pterygium has to dealt with earlier, and subsequently you can deal with the estimate the toricity about a month later, and then go ahead with the toric intraocular lens implant. Essentially, the toric intraocular lens is supposed to be for orthogonal astigmatism, where the steep and flat axes are exactly at 90 degrees to each other. In case it's a scarred cornea, if it is keratoconus, if it is post-refractive surgery, these are supposed to be relative contraindications. But having said that, there are multiple situations like a keratoconus situation like this. You can see that whether it's a toric ICL or a now this 624 vision is because of the cataract that is there, and because it's a more regular bow tie, I can go ahead and implant a toric intraocular or a toric. Here it's an extreme high that, and you can see only 660. Here I implant do a C3R treatment, also implant intracorneal lens, and here by doctor gone to -4 cylinder. That does not mean the condition has worsened. It just means the cornea has got regularized, because of which the patient is able to accept more cylinder. The sphere has significantly come down. It's a well-centered cone that you have now, and I can go ahead and use a toric intraocular lens. So to conclude, what are my final tips to maximize outcomes with toric intraocular lenses? Multiple measurements of K readings with whatever instrument you are comfortable with. Be guided by the refraction cylinder, but what is most important is the corneal cylinder. Ensure the ocular surface is optimal. Ensure you enter your measurements immediately so that there's no transcription errors. The surgically induced astigmatism, please remember, is just 0.1. And undercorrect with, but if you're using something like the Barrett formula, which incorporates this, then it is not really important to keep this in mind. And these are some other points that I already made. These are points that I did during surgery. Finally, I think it's time to get on with the game. I'm sure most of you are using already toric intraocular lenses, but I believe in a good current day intraocular lens practice, toric intraocular lenses should constitute about 25% of your intraocular lenses. In case you are able to successfully phacoemulsify your patients with a perfect capsular rhexis with a reasonable 360 overlap of the optic, remove the viscoelastic both from anterior and posterior to the intraocular lens, get consistent. Adoption of toric intraocular lenses would translate to happy patients and happy physicians. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you. like it's a complete lecture. It's a total lecture thing. So, Himanshu, would you like to comment on?
This is for archives, Ramu. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Excellent. No
Absolutely.
question. No question about it. Absolutely everything is what is going to matter. Placement of the IOL comes later, but determining the exact amount of astigmatism with the rule and against the rule and the axis. One of the things I learned was getting the axis would be the best from a topography that would give you the exact axis. However, the degree of astigmatism do not calculate from a topography. You could calculate from, and each machine that you have, the more you have, each machine has a mind of their own. So you'll have to be very clear which one are you looking at, and every K reading would be different. So you have to be very clear which one are you consistent with and where are your results coming from. So this is what I just wanted to add, because the whole story changes if you're beginning with the wrong step, that your axis is not correct and the degree of astigmatism is not correct from the corneal perspective. However well you center the lens, you may not get the correct answer. That's what I wanted to say for beginner's sake.
Thank you, Dr. Himanshu. Dr. Anurag, would you like to add some points to it?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I think I had prepared a 25 commandments list for a you are a beginner and you're just beginning to step into the toric IOL practice, what normally people do is they ask torics. So they choose high torics to begin with, and you'll go wrong with your placement or anything. Say you have 30% toricity loss and you're trying to correct 3 diopters of astigmatism, you're left with 1 diopter of astigmatism as a residual. Whereas if you implant a low toric, a 30% loss will mean around 0.3, which is insignificant. So I would request all the beginners to start with low torics, much rather than high torics, because they're less likely to give you surprises. That's a mindset that I'd like to change. We have talked about the corneal astigmatism measurement at depth and at length. At the same time, just like important is to determine the spherical part of the IOL as well, even if you are into the toric IOL practice, because there's no point in neutralizing the toricity and leaving the patient behind with a spherical residual. So it is also equally important to measure the axial length properly. If you do not have access to an optical biometer, fine, but do look at the curves from the ultrasonic biometer to determine whether the axial length has been properly calculated or not. The spherical equivalence which the Barrett sheet gives you is something that you must throw a proper glance at, because we saw from Dr. Ramurthy's case examples, a lot of times he's actually chosen the IOL slightly negative spherical equivalence. What we did not see in one of the fantastic surgical demonstrations that Dr. Ramurthy had is, be it manual marking or a markerless system, everybody is likely to have the parallax coming into play while you're trying to align the IOL in proper. If you're marking it manually and the winged flanged marker is being placed on the cornea, I would always make sure the image is right at the center of the opening. That's the reason why the opening is given on the flanged marker. So you align that with the center of the marker and then mark the cornea so that your marks are precise. And even then, if you have a parallax, what has worked best in my humble hands is I don't try to align the IOL marks along any particular mark, be it distal or proximal. What I do is I leave the IOL marks on the same side of the corneal marks. The access to a markerless system, then I would suggest that I think you must have noticed while Dr. Ramamurthy was presenting his videos, there is an arc on the left-hand side of the markerless systems. And there's a ball that keeps on traveling throughout the length of that arc. When you're doing your final alignment, make sure that the arc is visible to you. and the ball that's transcending the length of the arc is somewhere in the middle, that will tell you that the eye is properly centered. Because when you're trying to implant the IOL with the irrigation cannula on one of the hands, it is possible that you might be rotating the globe, and the tracker then changes and shows you a different axis altogether. So before the final alignment, make sure that the arc is visible, the ball somewhere at the center of the arc, and your main incision corresponds to the site where you originally planned it, be it 0, be it 20 for the left eye, whatever. So make sure that you are aligning it that way. And I think Dr. Ramamurthy very subtly made a very important point at the end of the procedure. Do not try to overinflate the anterior, do not make it rock hard. I batted an eyelash while the presentation was on. Thank you so much, sir.
Wonderful snippets, Dr. Anurag. And I must say that there's a question also related to that. And the question has been asked. This question is that sometimes what happens that, on one side, the mark is aligning and the other side, it's not aligning. So what to do and what is the reason and all that. So as you were discussing about parallax, we would also like to hear from Dr. Ramamurthy, his situation, something like this. And as you have rightly pointed out that it should be on one side. Dr. Ramamurthy, would you like to comment on this question? Yeah.
I think, yes, that sometimes does happen. I think it's sometimes because of the mismatch in the size of the cornea and the capsular bag that we are dealing with. And as very nicely pointed out with Anurag, the two dotted lines, I know that Callisto is an excellent tool as such. I've just used it in a few live surgeries. I'm more familiar with the Varion because that's the two dotted markings that are there on either side. That's usually about the cornea without a digital marking system. Supposing it's one side of the mark at 0 degrees and on the nasally and on temporally it's on the other side, then it's not aligned properly. But if it entirely shifted parallel to the markings, then usually you are spot on, and that's the way I like to leave my intraocular lens behind. It's not always possible parallel to the marks that you have made.
Wonderful.
Dr. Ramamurthy, I have a question for you. What about the customized IOLs where, you don't get the powers and you get it customized from a company, the toricity in the IOL itself?
Yeah.
And the IOLs where, they have only a 0, 180 alignment and, you don't, the axis alignment is also in the lens itself and always 0, 180. So what is your experience with these two kind of intraocular lenses?
The smart torics.
Smart torics.
I think that makes actually life easier in the sense that, of course, even if do not have to really, as far as you have a 0, 180 degree mark, and in case things a little simpler. I do not know whether there's anything more to your question. Am I missing something?
No, what I'm saying is that sometimes, the cylinders are very high or very different and you don't get them in normal series and then you get it customized like a, 10 diopter cylinder or whatever. So you think, those, and you have to, from the care group, you get these customized, lenses, especially for refractive errors. So would you have any experience on those kind of lenses?
No, I do have, I do have. And both in the spectral power, I've used higher powers as well as higher astigmatism. As Anurag nicely made up, all of us know that for every degree of misalignment, you use about 3.3% of the effect. So when you have a low power, even if you are misaligned by about 5 degrees, it's all right. But we do toric intraocular lens implant, even for some of our keratoconus patients who have a high degree of toricity. When the cone is central and they're improving well with their glasses, we go ahead and implant toric intraocular lenses. In these cases, it's extremely important to get your toricity aligned exactly. And in case there is even small degrees of misalignment, that can easily, even if a 3-degree misalignment can translate to a couple of diopters or 2.5 diopters of residual. Frequently do a piggyback toric intraocular lens, and that's also available from Indian companies. Your calculation is also more accurate that way, and you also are able to, the amount of spherical aberration with some of these extremely high power lenses is not quite acceptable, deteriorates the quality of vision. So generally, my limits as far as primary implantation is concerned is about 40 diopters and up to about 8 diopters of cylinder. Any residual astigmatism, either I handle it in the cornea during a laser vision correction, if it is a toric piggyback.
Okay.
I guess the reason for asking this question is basically based on the fact that sometimes we do encounter cases of keratoplasties wherein interact with high astigmatism, and that's why Dr.
Yeah.
So wherein we have implanted these customized lenses with very high astigmatism, and if it is well aligned, many times it works well, because in keratoplasties, nothing that was the reason why this question came up. There is another question. There's another question. Yeah, please go ahead.
The question for universal answer for all the participants here. For a person who doesn't have the computerized system, Varion or the other one, to mark, what is the standardized pattern that you would suggest for people? Because as Ramu said, you have a pen which is thick, so 5 degrees, 10 degrees could be off. Do you recommend the bubble mark?
The markless thing, then we have been doing using bubble marker for very long. And that is something which works well. And maybe just a small mark and 3, 9, 6 o'clock. And then after that, on the table, you can have a nice mark, produced as Dr. Ramamurthy was showing on the table. So just to, get the feel that this is the point, a thin mark will also do. And then on the table, we can have a proper mark. So that is what we mostly do. We use bubble. One way of pendular method by which you just hold a thread and which bisects the cornea, and by that you can mark. So all these methods are there which helps, but mostly if I'm using markless, we do have Callisto as well as Varion, but if I'm not doing that, then I do the reference marking by bubble mark.
Ramu, you already say something.
I think, I also used a bubble marker for a long time before we got the digital system. But towards the end of it, I actually shifted over to slit lamp. Main problem with the bubble marker is it's quite accurate, but the thickness of the mark that you leave behind is not quite under control, and it can also be tilted a little bit. Even though you understand it has to be parallel to the floor, you do not always get that. So what I used to do is that before the pupils are even dilated, very often it used to be done by one of my colleagues, and have a horizontal slit, which is bisecting the pupil before dilating, and do not mark there, but use a 26 gauge needle to Namrata said if the lens has to be placed at 0 and 80 degrees, that itself will suffice. I found that in case you do not have an access to a digital marking system, doing this preoperatively on a slit lamp with just a needle creating a scratch on the cornea is more accurate than somewhat less controlled devices which use an ink mark.
Anurag?
Irrespective of the marking system, sir, I always ask my patients to look at an object which is placed. I want the accommodation to be completely relaxed. What I found with my observation with a few surgeries is that with accommodation playing a role, if you give the fixation target up close to the face, then they also undergo some amount of internal rotation in the eyes. And I found that when I matched them to with the markerless system, I found that the eye has internally rotated a bit, and the mark that I had created, thinking it to be at 0 degrees, has actually shifted a little down. So both of these systems work very well. I still mark and then leave the speculum for a precious 10 seconds so that the mark actually establishes before getting washed off with the clear film. So that just leaves. And of course, the thickness can be controlled with just one stroke over the blade and not multiple strokes, so that the mark that you create is thinner in comparison to if you apply multiple strokes with the pen.
So dilated pupil in the OT.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Rishi, you have something to mention?
You are mute.
Yeah, I enjoyed the presentation. I joined late. My apologies, but I think it was awesome. The rest of it, what I followed. And then, of course, I've been in the discussion from the beginning. And I think the points that both Himanshu and Anurag have raised are awesome. I mean, Himanshu coming up with the most important point, actually, of astigmatism. I typically, for my torics, will use at least 3 devices. And I will always see what kind of astigmatism I think that would be something that would be a question to the panel as to what happens when your refractive cylinder in the cornea and the refractive cylinder in the refraction doesn't match, and do you give any importance to the lenticular tilt at all at the time and planning, or do you just look at corneal cylinders completely? That is one. Second, would you look at the cylindrical component of the posterior surface at all, while especially in the higher pass? And thirdly, of course, coming back to my first comment, which is on what would you do if you have 3 instruments which give you 3 principal axes which are 15 degrees apart?
Yeah, Ramu mentioned that he gave a lovely answer. Barrett takes care of the posterior cornea. The calculation is taken very well care of that. So you don't have to worry about that so much. unless it's, and he mentioned something very important about with the rule and against the rule, because it's going to go as age advances. If you have a younger patient, you have to worry about. If you're an older patient, where it's already been subtracted too.
Right.
But this angle is so important, Ramu. If your assistant is doing it and if the patient is just a little tilted, and patients have a tendency to put their
he asked, he said 3 instruments giving 3 different values. How would you deal with it? That's a excellent question. And that's a common problem that we face. And first answer would be don't use 3 instruments. Stick to one. My most important person, more than my consultant, some of my consultants is my biometrist. And the same fellow has been doing it for more than 15 years. He's good in the job. He's much better than me. And I trust him completely. And that's extremely important. And in case there is a significant, the IOL master and the Varion or maybe some other instrument is giving you different readings. In that case, the most important thing that you do is to go back to those instruments and verify again. There might be, you have to see those green traffic signals coming on all your readings. The quality of your scans has to be good. And in spite of it, if it is there, Barrett again has an answer. Axis from the topography, but basically it's flawed. It's like comparing one axis from the other. So there is it's available again on the APSRS website, where you can feed the data from 3 different instruments, having made sure that the data that we have acquired from the 3 instruments is good. And this takes not the mean, but the median of the 3 instruments. And by virtue of the median calculation, it does away with the outliers. And what Barrett says is that when he uses the median of 3 different instruments, which are giving reasonably accurate readings, his extent of less than 0.5 diopters residual astigmatism is 93% in his hands. And I have also tried this in a few cases where we have gone by the median. When you are sure that slightly varying results, you want to be bang on target, and you are quite sure that all of them are giving you good readings.
Brilliant. I think that's an excellent thought. My other comment was on what Anurag actually highlighted, which was about parallax. And I've noticed that when the axis of implantation is more vertical to your eye line, the parallax is less. But if it's horizontal to your eye line, then the parallax is much more. So the one thing that one can look at is to in the axis. I'm also in complete agreement with overcorrecting against the rules and marginally undercorrecting with the rules. So that was a very good point that has come up. This wasn't there or didn't exist many years ago when we started toric surgeries, but over the years we have learned this. And I think that has worked very well. I think that should be one of the take-home messages from Dr. Ramamurthy's talk.
One more question. If you had a break in the anterior capsule, no V loss.
Has an excellent track record, then yes. The answer is yes.
Depends where it is, actually. It depends where the break is. I mean, if it's bang on where the implant
optic capture actually. I did. The haptic was in the bag, and I brought up the optic over it, and so that I could, bring the IOL in that axis, and it remained very well in that, well captured in the capsule, and the optic was well aligned. So that has worked well in that case, in case of megalocornea. I guess maybe something like that can be done in a PC tier case, but
Part of that particular IOL, sir? Did you undercorrect the spherical power of that particular IOL because the optic was shifting
Anterior.
anteriorly?
yes, but to tell you frankly, I did not. But maybe we can do a little bit of
Rotational stability. We all toric manufacturers claim that their IOLs are the best. I mean, they don't rotate from where you place them. Of course, we all know that none of them is actually telling the entire truth. But between designs, would a 4-point kind of a fixation IOL be more stable, or a plate haptic as compared to these open loop designs? Theoretically, to me, it's a 4-point fixation would probably be more stable to where you blunted it. As compared to the open loop designs. Any comments on that?
I think all of us agree that Alcon lens is fairly stable. We haven't seen, so despite not being like that. But I'll give you something on a plate haptic. Very interesting case. I must discuss toric multifocal put somewhere else. The lens kept rotating. The reason was the rhexis was big. It's very surprising. It was a very important learning in my case. Every time I would see a patient on one machine, another machine, or make him lie on the microscope, I saw the lens was moving. And to me, there was no rent any which way. It was possibly a huge rhexis which was there, and it was a bigger eye, and the lens kept moving.
Do you all think that we do need a toric design lens in a 3-piece lens, which we don't have, as of now? There is no 3-piece lens which has toric marks on it. So I think, do you think the company should be working towards that also?
Why not?
Absolutely.
The problem is they're even withdrawing the spherical 3-piece lenses, unfortunately. I think 3-piece lenses is a great design, and having that would be a great help. About the rotation of the lens, I believe that's mainly because the size of the bag. I do not know whether the size of the rhexis obviously it's mostly manufacturers' claims that we go by. But then there is one significant study, the most commonly used. I'm very happy with both Alcon and Johnson & Johnson, so absolutely no financial interest, is that the Alcon lenses are significantly more stable than the Johnson & Johnson study. And this was published in ophthalmology by David Chang and his group, where he showed that there is with the Restore toric lenses, that again was about 3 times. And that was essentially because of the haptic design. So all credit to Johnson & Johnson. They took this study very seriously, and they decided to do something with the haptics. And that's the reason what they have done is to roughen up their haptics, and that's said to become available in India, but in abroad in US and in Europe and some of Asia available because of the rougher haptics that they have, where essentially the haptics have been left unpolished. They have found that the stability of these lenses is much better, and this they have labeled it as Technis 2, and I think it's going to become available in India also in very shortly. So it's important that even these small important. When you have a large haptic, like a 4-point fixation, by virtue of the abetting on the fornices, the capsula back quite nicely. They seem to stay in place most often if they are placed right.
We never look for the bag size ever, Raman. We
Sorry?
you know, very interesting what you mean. Even I thought as much.
Yeah.
The bag size. And
Even I thought.
when I saw it free floating, I was absolutely surprised. So that's a different thing in my mind. And of course, on the same boundary sheet, our one piece IQ lens or a toric lens expands to a desired size.
I
Not
think
only that,
that-
it
That's
also
what, wherein, on the table only, I had to decide that, because the bag was big and it was not stabilizing well. And that's why on the table only, I had to decide. That's why I did not do under correction. Maybe could
I
have
think bag
had.
volume is something, which they should look in future, because the volume of the bag would differ in all the cases, which is not factored in as of now in any of the lens designs, what to talk of the toric designs. So that is something which they should be looking at in future.
Yeah, we have never
even then
mentioned.
when we are looking at a seal. Yes, sir.
The
Sorry, sir.
reason
Sorry.
is that, the reason, Amrita, they don't look at the back size is that it doesn't make business sense for them. Having a standard size of 13.5 millimeter,
Yeah.
I asked them, why are you withdrawing these 3-piece lenses? They're so good. Their answer was that, there's not enough takers for it in the Western. Having multiple
The 3 pieces here. Now, one more-
I guess the next level will be that, even the glue dowels should have toric component to it, which should be a doable with that. But I'm sure that's a long way to go.
No, I was just wondering, Dr. Ramurthy is telling that, they are withdrawing multi-piece lenses. So I was just wondering then how will I be able to do glue dowel, and I'll have to, think about some other options.
Some other alternatives.
Which companies are withdrawing, Dr. Ramurthy?
J&J
Johnson
has.
has completely withdrawn.
J&J has it.
J&J has
Okay.
withdrawn. And,
Okay.
Alcon is still coming up, and Hoya is
Yeah.
there. But I was very happy with the Johnson & Johnson 3-piece lenses. Unfortunately, it's no longer available. Actually, their multifocal lenses also I used to always have in stock, just in case I have a problem PCR, then I used to use the 3-piece multifocal. But now that's no longer available. But as far as your scale fixation is concerned, still the Zeiss lenses with the PVDF haptics in them. But now we have our own Indian companies. I know multiple companies are doing it. I have some experience with the IOCare lenses. They are quite good. I used some toric IPCLs initially, but obviously now custom-made toric IOLs, piggyback lenses are available. Toric multifocal torics are available. They are quite stable, and their size is larger. They are 14 millimeters overall diameter, 6.5 millimeter optic. And at least in my hands, is not absolute refractive accuracy, but a large debulking of the
lot
goes up.
of time, and plus it is very expensive.
Yes.
So that is a major concern. And of course, the undulations that you get in the haptics, perhaps, I mean, that's what they explain, that is the reason why they are quite stable. And they have a posterior angulation and they are hydrophilic. So that's why the biocompatibility is
Also rounded edge so that they don't scrape.
rounded edges. Yes. Yeah. So there's one question which is often asked whenever you are discussing toric implant, that
Or less, then I don't consider a toric lens. But if it's giving T3 or more, then whether it's monofocal or multifocal, my go-to is a toric lens. So obviously the toric calculator automatically measures whether it's takes into consideration the posterior corneal astigmatism, considers whether it is with the rule or against the rule astigmatism. So the best thing is to go ahead and use, even if you do not have a optical biometer, you can still do it with your on an online platform and see whether a T3 or above is indicated. But if you want just numbers, what I would say is that about 0.75 to 1 diopter for against the rule astigmatism, and for with the rule is about 1.25 diopters or more. But frankly, I don't believe in that now. I go more by my toric calculator.
Slightly different with me, sir. I would implant at the moment the toric calculator suggests a toric implant that includes a T2, and the threshold is even lower if it's an 80 IOL or a trifocal or a TDOF IOL. So T2 is absolutely go in my case. If it's a sub-toric implant kind of astigmatism that the patient has, then I would counsel the patient for arcuate incisions and flaps, because that's where I think it's the sub-toric implant. I mean, people
T2 lens corrects 0.5 diopters of astigmatism. And as you rightly said, extremely demanding patients who are going in for multifocals, I mean, trifocals, etc., it might be a good idea. But I find that, the cost-benefit ratio is quite small, and usually about 0.25, 0.5 diopters they do tolerate. And it's not that I've never done T2s, but whenever it's usually from T3 and above that I very actively go ahead and counsel them and tell them this is way lowering the bar would be even better.
Post-surgical residual astigmatism management. And Dr. Vipul has asked that, have you used toric phakic IOLs for correcting them?
I have done them earlier. I have done a couple of toric IPCLs. That was because, as I said, at that point of time, only Sulcoflex lenses were available from Reina, and the toric version was very expensive and hard to get. But now that, but those lenses, it's off-label use. Piggyback lenses which are meant for placing in the sulcus.
Another question, and that is regarding indications of toric IOLs in children. Dr. Kiran wants to know. So what's in your opinion?
Does somebody else want to take the question?
Yeah, Dr. Anurag?
Well, children, as in anybody, any patient and below 14 years age group, I am still an old school believer. I always suture my wounds. I mean, that's how we are taught at Madurai. So I still go by that. Even if it's a 2.2 millimeter incision, the main incision is always sutured. And once you put a suture in a wound, you yourself are not very sure the table itself. And then comes the progressive age, increasing age, and then the increasing toricity on the cornea, as Dr. Ramamurthy was also discussing with, along his talk. The other thing is the point that I mentioned in the first part of my series of snippets. When you're not sure of the spherical behavior of the IOL, how the child is going to behave, how the drift is going to happen with advancing age in terms of the spherical residual, what would you achieve by only correcting the cylinder? The child's going to be myopic. We all know that as the age advances, we have to resort to a different method of correcting the spherical residual when the child grows old. So my threshold for using a toric IOL in a pediatric, in the pediatric age group is very, but what I have seen is the child developing a slowly progressing myopia over the years to come. So I would have a very high threshold for that.
What about a child having high astigmatism and there's a risk of meridional amblyopia after the surgery? Will you think about it?
Sir, when we take up pediatric patients for cataract surgery, one of the first things the parents about a few things that are absolute must-dos. That includes a frequent follow-up, that includes the necessity of repeated examinations under anesthesia. And the third point is the child has to use glasses all the time. I tell them that if you're not asking your child, you're not making your child wear glasses all the time, what I'm going to do is only 50% of the job. The rest 50% rests in your hands. So irrespective of correcting the whole amount of astigmatism that the child might be having and meridional amblyopia, of course, might be setting in if you're not giving the child to use glasses all the time. So ratio, you calculate it with whatever ratio, you might give it a thought, but at the end of the day, looking at the benefit that the child is going to draw over a period of time, perhaps the necessity of implanting a toric just goes down.
Agree with you. Anshu, any thoughts on that?
Well, as you said rightly, if I have given a choice in a pediatric age group, whatever astigmatism I can correct with the suture, anyway, I'll cut off the suture later. It's not going to be much that is going to be residual behind. How big is my incision? So I would go ahead with the toric if it's a large toric. But anyway, with children, you have a great advantage that you can do your LASIK later. They're going to be turning 18 sometime later. And I can always do refractive surgery a little while later. So my residual, whatever happens, doesn't matter in a child. I can always cover it up.
I tend to agree with both of them in the sense that, I often consider pediatric cataract surgery as a two-stage surgery. Important. And again, the kind of astigmatism comes into play. If it is 1.52 diopters with the rule astigmatism, less than 6 years of age, I would not consider a toric intraocular lens. It's above that age. Then obviously I would leave not really handle the cylinder, simply because the with the rule astigmatism is likely to decay into against the rule astigmatism as the person ages. But if it's against the rule astigmatism or 1.5 diopters, then I would definitely go ahead and correct the cylinder. In these cases, because the posterior corneal astigmatism and the decay that happens against the rule astigmatism is going to increase during the lifetime of the patient. So all these things are more to minimize the amount of refractive error that the child has to deal with rather than hitting a refractive accuracy. Obviously, frequent follow-up glasses, contact lenses, and final rehabilitation at the age of 20 or 21 is all necessary.
So the message is that there can't be a blanket statement. You have to customize your, management.
And rightly so. He's got terrific experience, and we've greatly gained from his presentation today, as well as the excellent comments from Himanshu and Anurag, and with Namrata and you joining in. I've learned a lot in this, and I think it was an absolutely fantastic session of learning from the masters. With regards to toric implants, we covered a wide variety of aspects of toric, and including pediatrics. I mean, it's not something that I would normally consider toric implant at all, because I agree with Dr. Ramurthy that it is essentially a two-stage surgery. We never counsel the patient that he's going to be off glasses. He can't be off glasses because there is a reading element as well as the distance element, which has to be catered to in these patients. So unless you're looking at implanting a multifocal. So toricity is the least of the problems, I think, in children. There are many other problems to face and to tackle. So I think it's been a wonderful discussion and a very nice presentation. And I must thank you, Rajesh and Namrata, and the team at ISCRIS for, again, a fantastic session, which I'm sure will be remembered by all. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, sir. So I would like to thank Dr. Ramurthy, who agreed to, join today. He had to go somewhere, but big thanks to the two, gave so much valuable inputs to Himanshu and Dr. Anurag. And of course, thanks to Dr. Namrata and Dr. Rajiv. You are absolutely quiet. So the last and final word, before I say thanks to our sponsor IPCA and IT person Bageshwar and Anil. Rajiv.
One word that I would say for a lot of people who are watching, beginners, just jump into it. It's not that difficult. We have made it very difficult for you, but it's not that bad. It's quite easy. You can always recorrect yourself in there. You will learn at every stage. It's as simple as putting a regular lens. Go with the bottom line like that. Don't be worried that a toric lens is like a big Herculean task. It's not.
It was really a fantastic masterclass by Dr. Ramurthy, and I didn't really feel the need to say anything in between because the panelists and Dr. Ramurthy were fantastic. Dr. Rishi
Spontaneous from everywhere, and you also conducted everything so well, and the answers were again so spontaneous and coming from the heart. It didn't feel like a a formal kind of a webinar. It felt more like a more like an interactive meeting kind of a thing, amongst us.
And I would like to give special thanks to you, ma'am, because you were switching from one to the other. So thanks.
No, I am not switching from one. I am in this only.
What is the Raj behind the parda? Why is she not on the screen?
Because I'm
Okay. Thank you. Thanks to all, and a very good night.